The little girl was sitting on the curb outside the Empress Hotel at 11 o'clock at night, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, and she didn't cry. That was the thing that stopped Kellian Voss cold. Not the fact that she was alone. Not the fact that it was October in Vancouver and the rain had started coming down sideways off the harbor. It was that she wasn't crying. She was just sitting there, watching the street like she was waiting for a bus she already knew wasn't coming. Kellian had seen a lot of things in his 41 years. He had built an empire on things other people preferred not to see. He owned 3 legitimate businesses, 2 that existed only on paper, and 1 conversation, the kind you had once with a man and never needed to have again. He was not someone who stopped for things on the street. He stopped. "Hey," he said. He crouched down to her level the way you do with animals you don't want to startle. She looked at him. She had gray eyes, the kind that look older than the rest of the face. He guessed she was 5, maybe 6. "Where's your mom?" She considered the question like it deserved careful thought. "I don't know," she said. "She left?" "Left where?" The girl looked back at the street. "Just left." Kellian looked up. The Empress lobby was lit gold behind the glass doors. His dinner was getting cold on the 42nd floor. He had a meeting at 7 the next morning with a man who was nervous about a property deal, and nervous men made mistakes, and Kellian could not afford mistakes right now. He looked back down at the girl. She was wearing 1 shoe. He sat down on the curb next to her. His driver, a quiet man named Boone who had worked for him for 11 years and had learned not to ask questions, watched from the car without moving. "What's your name?" Kellian asked. She thought about this too, like she wasn't sure she should say. "Poppy," she said finally. "Kellian," he said. She looked at his hand, the ring on his right hand, thick silver, a detail that most people missed because they were too busy looking at his face. "That's a funny ring. It was my father's. Is he dead?" "Yes." She nodded like that was a reasonable thing, and not something you said to a stranger on a curb in the rain. "My dad is dead too," she said. "That's why we came here. Mum said we were starting over." She paused. I think she meant just her. Kellian didn't say anything for a moment. The rain hit the pavement and the streetlights blurred in the puddles, and somewhere down the block a car alarm started and stopped. "How long ago did she leave?" he asked. "When it was still light," Poppy said. "That was 4 or 5 hours ago." He pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted to handle things that didn't have clean solutions. Tara Vance picked up on the second ring. She was his operations director, which meant she solved problems. She had once calmly arranged the relocation of 3 families in under 6 hours. She said, "What happened?" It wasn't a question. "I need you to find out if there's a missing child report for a girl named Poppy, 5 or 6 years old, somewhere in the last few hours. Vancouver PD. A pause. "Kellian, I know. Where is she right now?" "She's sitting next to me on a curb." Another pause, longer. "Are you on Government Street?" "Yes." "Don't move." He put the phone away. Poppy was looking at him. She had pulled the rabbit up under her chin and was watching him with that flat, careful attention that children have when they've learned that watching is safer than asking. "Are you going to call the police?" she said. "My colleague is looking into things," he said. "The police came before," Poppy said. "At our old place, they talked to Mum and then they left, and then it got worse." Kellian looked at her. He had a very practiced face. 30 years of practicing stillness, of giving nothing away in a room full of people who were looking for weakness. He used that face now because the alternative was something he didn't have a name for. "When it got worse," he said carefully. "What do you mean?" Poppy looked down at her rabbit. She touched its missing ear. "Just touched the place where it used to be, the way you touch an old scar." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Tara called back in 8 minutes. "No missing persons report," she said. "Nothing filed. I pulled the social services database. There's a file for a child matching that description. First name Poppy, last name Deschênes. Father deceased 14 months ago. Mother is Colette Deschênes, 31, 2 prior welfare checks, 1 substantiated. The child was supposed to have a follow-up appointment with a family services worker 6 weeks ago. The mother didn't show. The rain was coming down harder. "The mother's not here," Kellian said. "I know that," Tara said. "That's why I'm telling you all of this instead of just giving you the police non-emergency number and going back to bed." "A beat. What do you want to do?" He looked at Poppy. She had leaned slightly to the left, just slightly, so that her shoulder was touching his arm. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the street again, but she'd moved closer. "Get me Dr. Reinhold," he said, "and call the hotel. Tell them I need a 2-bedroom suite and I need it ready in 20 minutes. Kellian, I'm not leaving a 6-year-old on a curb in the rain, Tara." A long pause. "No," she said, and something in her voice shifted. "No, I didn't think you were, Doctor." Petra Reinhold arrived at the hotel at midnight with a bag and the specific kind of unruffledness that belongs to people who have been woken up for serious things enough times that they've stopped pretending to be surprised. She was 53, compact, direct. She had been Kellian's family doctor for 9 years. She had also, in that time, treated a broken wrist that he had explained as a sports injury, and which she had documented exactly as he described because she understood some things had to stay in their own rooms. She came into the suite and found Poppy sitting at the table, eating room service soup. Not quickly, not hungrily, but with the careful small spoonfuls of someone who'd learned not to trust that the food would stay. Kellian was sitting across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, also eating soup because he had looked at the room service menu and realized he hadn't eaten dinner either. Petra looked at this tableau for a moment, then she set her bag down. "Hi," she said to Poppy. "I'm Petra." Poppy looked at her. "Are you a doctor?" "I am. Are you going to touch me?" Petra pulled out the chair beside her and sat down without touching her at all. "Not unless you say it's okay," she said. "I thought I'd just sit here for a minute first." "Is that all right?" Poppy considered. "Okay," she said, and went back to her soup. Petra caught Kellian's eye across the table. He gave her nothing. She gave him the smallest nod and looked away. It took 40 minutes and another bowl of soup and a conversation about the rabbit, whose name, Poppy explained, was Captain, because her dad had said captains were the bravest things, before Poppy said, "Okay, you can look." What Petra found, she documented carefully. Old bruising along the left shoulder, faded yellow at the edges, consistent with impact from something blunt. A burn mark on the inside of the right forearm, small, circular, the kind you didn't get from a stove, both feet. And this was the thing that stayed with Kellian, afterward for a long time. The soles of her feet were calloused and cracked in a way that meant she'd been walking without shoes for stretches long enough to build scar tissue. She was 6 years old. Petra cleaned and dressed what needed to be dressed. She spoke to Poppy the whole time in a calm, even voice, asking permission before every movement, and Poppy answered seriously, like she was in a meeting. When it was done, Petra helped Poppy into the second bedroom. The bed was enormous. Poppy stood at the edge of it and looked at it like she wasn't sure what the protocol was. "It's for sleeping," Petra said. "I know," Poppy said. She looked at Kellian in the doorway. "Will you stay?" Kellian Voss had closed deals that restructured the ownership of 7 city blocks. He had sat in rooms with men who were deciding things that would move money in amounts that most people couldn't imagine. He had done all of this with his face perfectly still. "Yes," he said. "I'll be right here." He sat in the chair in the corner of the room while Petra dimmed the lights. Poppy lay down and held Captain against her chest and watched the ceiling. "My mum is not a bad person," she said to the ceiling. Kellian waited. "She just gets very tired," Poppy said. "She gets tired and then she leaves and then she comes back and she cries and she says she's sorry." She paused. "But then she gets tired again." "That sounds very hard," Kellian said, because it was true and because there was nothing else to say. "Yes," Poppy said, like she'd thought about it a lot. "It is." She was asleep in 4 minutes. Kellian didn't move for another 20. Tara arrived at 7 in the morning with coffee and 2 people from a family services organization she had pre-vetted. Not the government system, not after what Poppy had said about the police, but a private advocacy group that worked alongside the system and had a lawyer on staff and knew how to make noise in the right places. They were a woman named Sandra who wore sensible shoes and had the quiet authority of someone who had seen everything and was still angry about most of it, and a younger man named Whitfield who mostly listened and took notes. Kellian met them in the main room while Petra sat with Poppy, who had woken up and eaten 3 pancakes and asked if Captain could have some orange juice. Sandra sat across from Kellian and looked at him. "You're not her father," she said. "No, you're not a relative. No, you found her on the street. On a curb," he said, "in the rain, at 11 at night." Sandra looked at him for a long moment. He could tell she was doing the same thing he did in rooms, reading, assessing, looking for the thing behind the thing. "Mr. Voss," she said, "what do you want here?" "I want her to be safe," he said. "That's all. I want someone responsible to take over who actually knows what they're doing, and I want to make sure she goes somewhere where she won't end up back on a curb in 3 months. That's a more specific ask than most people in your position make." "I have resources," he said. "Use them, however you need to." Sandra looked at Tara, who looked back at her without expression. "What she means," Tara said, "is that we will fund whatever legal support, placement support, or advocacy work is needed, indefinitely, no strings." Sandra picked up her coffee. "I've heard no strings before." "I imagine you have," Kellian said. "I'm still saying it." She looked at him again. Then she nodded once and opened her folder. The next 3 weeks were not simple. Nothing about the intersection of a powerful man, a disappeared mother, and a 6-year-old girl with a paper trail of missed appointments and unsubstantiated reports was ever going to be simple. Colette Deschaines was found, by Tara, not by the police, at a cousin's apartment in Surrey 4 days after Kellian had found Poppy on that curb. She had, by the cousin's account, arrived in a state, stayed for 2 days, and then left again in a direction unknown. The legal picture was complicated. Sandra and Whitfield navigated it with the specific patience of people who had learned that hurrying the system usually just damaged it. Kellian gave them what they needed and stayed out of the way, which was harder than it sounded, because staying out of the way was not something he was built for. He visited Poppy 3 times in the interim placement, a licensed foster home in East Vancouver run by a woman named Gwen, who had been doing this for 16 years and had the kind of steadiness that only comes from having seen the worst and chosen, repeatedly, to keep showing up. Poppy had a room with a window that looked into a garden. She showed him a drawing she'd done of a house with 4 people in front of it. He asked who they were. "That's Gwen," she said, pointing to the tallest figure, "and that's Captain." She pointed to a small figure that he realized was the rabbit. "And that's you." She pointed to the second tallest figure, which had been given, he noticed, his ring, a small gold circle on the right hand. He looked at the drawing for a moment. "Who's the 4th person?" he asked. Poppy looked at the drawing. The 4th figure was smaller than the others with long dark marks for hair. "I don't know yet," she said. "I just felt like there should be someone else." He took the drawing home. He didn't examine why. The 4th person arrived, as things sometimes do, sideways and without warning, in the form of a woman who was arguing with his building manager in the lobby of the Haywood building on a Tuesday morning in November. He heard her before he saw her. She had a clear, carrying voice, and she was not raising it, which, in Kellian's experience, was more alarming than shouting, because it meant she was not afraid. "I understand the lease terms," she was saying, "and what I'm telling you is that the terms were misrepresented at signing. I have the email, I have the original listing, and I have a very simple ask, which is that you correct the discrepancy. Because the alternative is that I take this to the landlord tribunal, and we spend the next 6 months arguing about it in a way that's inconvenient for everyone." Kellian's building manager, a man named Gregor who had been doing this job for 12 years and was not easily rattled, looked rattled. She was standing with a folder under one arm and a coffee in the other hand, and she was wearing a gray coat that was slightly too big for her, the kind of thing you buy secondhand because it was the warmest option, not the best-fitting one. She was, he guessed, late 20s. Dark hair pulled back. A small scar above her left eyebrow that looked like it had been there long enough to be part of her face. He stopped walking. She glanced over. He had the specific experience in that moment of being looked at the way he looked at people, directly, assessing, with no particular anxiety about what she might find. Then she looked back at Gregor. "I'll give you until Friday," she said. She handed him a piece of paper. He could see it was a printed email chain. "My contact information is at the bottom." She walked past Kellian toward the door. He turned. "You're one of my tenants," he said. She turned. She looked at him. "You're the landlord," she said. It wasn't a question. "Kellian Voss." She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Nadia Fournier," she said. "Unit 14C. There's an issue with the lease terms." "I heard." "Good," she said. "Then I won't have to repeat myself." She left. Gregor turned to look at him. Kellian looked at the door she'd gone through. "Fix the lease terms," he said. "Mr. Voss, the terms are technically..." "Fix them," he said. "She's right." He found out, without particularly trying to, or at least, without trying in any way he was prepared to examine closely, that Nadia Fournier was a legal researcher who worked contract to contract for 3 different firms and had been living in 14C for 7 months, and had, in that time, filed 2 maintenance requests that had both been handled, and 1 complaint about a noise issue that had been resolved. She paid her rent on the 1st of the month, always. She had, according to Gregor, who offered this information voluntarily, once helped another tenant understand their rights in a dispute with a utility company. She had not asked for anything in return. He did not think about her until 3 days later, when he ran into her in the building's small lobby garden, a space he almost never used because he didn't have time for spaces that didn't serve a function. And she was sitting on a bench reading a case file, and she looked up and said, "Mr. Voss, Ms. Fournier." "The lease was corrected," she said. "Thank you." "You were right," he said. "It wasn't a favor." She looked at him with that direct look again. Most people don't distinguish between those 2 things. Most people find it easier not to. She tilted her head slightly. "Sit down if you want," she said, which was not an invitation so much as a statement of availability, and he recognized that tone because it was his own. He sat down. They talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with leases or property, or the specific weight of the world Kellian Voss moved through. She was from Trois-Rivières originally, had come to Vancouver for a position that fell through and then stayed because leaving felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She'd put herself through a legal studies program while working nights at a hotel, not complaining, just stating facts, the way people do when they're used to their own life and don't need it validated. He told her almost nothing about himself. She didn't ask. When he stood up to leave, she said, "You come down here often?" "Never," he said. She nodded like that made sense and went back to her file. He came back the next Tuesday. He didn't tell Nadia about Poppy. Not at first. It wasn't a secret, or it wasn't meant to be. It just occupied a room in him that he hadn't figured out how to open yet, because he didn't fully understand what was in it. He had, by November's third week, worked with Sandra to ensure that Poppy's case had been formally reviewed, that Colette Deschaines' whereabouts were known to the relevant authorities, and that Gwen's placement was being extended while longer-term options were assessed. He had also quietly set up a fund administered through Sandra's organization that would cover Poppy's needs regardless of what the system did or didn't do. He visited on Saturdays. He didn't examine why Saturdays specifically. He brought things, not toys mostly, because Poppy didn't ask for toys. He brought a book about ships, because she'd said once that captain was named for a captain and she wasn't totally sure what captains did. He brought a map of Vancouver with things marked on it, because she had asked once where they were, in relation to where she'd been found, and he'd realized she wanted to understand the shape of where she was in the world. He brought one Saturday a second-hand stuffed dog he'd found in a shop on Main Street because he walked past it and thought she might like it, which was a thought he had without analyzing it, and then spent the drive over analyzing considerably. "She named the dog Voss," he said. "That's my last name," she said. "I know." He looked at Gwen, who was making tea at the counter and not looking at him, and who said nothing. He told Nadia on a Thursday evening in the lobby garden, which had become a place they both arrived at separately and stayed at together, without either of them having named what that was. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She had a quality he'd noticed early. She waited until someone was actually finished before she responded, which sounds like a small thing and is, in his experience, extraordinarily rare. When he was done, she said, "How often do you visit her?" "Saturdays," he said. "Every Saturday?" "Yes." She looked at him. "And the fund you set up, does she know about it?" "No. She's 6. Right." She was quiet for a moment. "She named a dog after you." Yes. Nadia looked out at the dark garden. She had her coffee in both hands the way she always did when she was thinking. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I don't know," he said, which was honest, and which was not something he said often. "You do know," she said, not unkindly. "You're just waiting to be sure." He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the garden, as if the answer was somewhere in the bare November plants. But there was something in the line of her that was entirely certain, not about him, about what things meant when they meant something. "She drew a fourth person," he said, "in a picture. She said she didn't know who it was yet." Nadia looked at him then. He looked back. "She'll figure it out," Nadia said. "The legal process of becoming a child's guardian is not a single moment. It is 100 small moments spread across forms and interviews and home assessments and phone calls with people who ask careful questions and document the answers." Kellian moved through all of it with the same patience he applied to negotiations that mattered. Not hurrying, not forcing, because the thing you were trying to protect was more important than the timeline. Tara helped. Sandra helped. Gwen wrote a letter that was, Kellian was told by Sandra, one of the strongest she had ever submitted in 20 years of advocacy work, and which he was not permitted to read, and which he respected enough not to push for. Nadia helped in a way that she would probably not have called helping. She showed up on a Saturday in December and sat with Poppy in Gwen's living room and drew maps. Not of Vancouver, but of imaginary places, countries Poppy invented, with names she made up on the spot. She had a quietness with children that Kellian recognized as the real kind, not the performed kind, the kind that comes from taking small people seriously when most adults don't. Poppy, who had been cautious with everyone for the first month and a half, climbed into the armchair next to Nadia and said, "I'll be the explorer." "That depends," Nadia said. "Does the Queen get to make the laws?" Poppy thought about it. "Some of them. Acceptable," Nadia said. On the drive home, Nadia was quiet for most of it, looking at the city going by. She's remarkable, she said finally. Yes, Kellian said. She told me her dad named her Rabbit Captain because captains were the bravest things. Nadia was looking out the window. She said it like she was explaining something important, like she wanted to make sure I understood who he was. Kellian said nothing. She misses him, Nadia said. She carries him around with her in that rabbit, and she doesn't make a big thing of it because she's learned not to make big things of what she needs. She paused. That's a very specific skill to have at 6. He drove. The rain had started again, the way it does in December in Vancouver, like it never really stopped. I think she'll be okay, Nadia said. I think she's going to be more than okay. He believed her. That was the thing about Nadia Fournier. She stated things as facts only when she was sure of them, and when she was sure of them, she was right. The guardianship was finalized on the 14th of January. Kellian had half expected it to feel like a closing, the end of a process, the signing of a final document. It felt nothing like that. It felt like a door opening onto a room he hadn't known was there. Gwen brought Poppy to the office where the paperwork was signed. Poppy was wearing a red coat that was slightly too long in the arms and carrying Captain under one arm and Voss under the other. She watched the signing with the serious attention she gave to things that mattered. When it was done, the administrator said, "Poppy, do you understand what this means?" Poppy looked at Kellian. "It means he's responsible for me," she said. "That's right." She thought about this for a moment. Then she looked at Kellian and said with the directness that had been the first thing he'd noticed about her and which had not changed in 3 months, "Are you going to be my dad?" The room was very quiet. Kellian Voss, who had not been uncertain in a room in a very long time, felt something move through him like a current. Not a word, not a thought, just a settling. The way things settle when they've found the place they were always supposed to be. "If you want me to be," he said. Poppy considered this with the full seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I think that would be good." She crossed the room and stood beside him and put her small hand into his, the way she'd leaned against his arm that first night on the curb. Not demanding, not asking, just choosing. He closed his hand around hers. In the picture she drew that evening, there were 4 people standing in front of a house. A tall man with a ring on his right hand, a woman with dark hair and a coat that was slightly too big, a girl with a rabbit under one arm and a dog under the other, and the girl was in the middle, between the two of them, and her arms were stretched out to both sides, holding on. Under the picture, in careful block letters that listed slightly to the left, the way all her letters did, she had written one word: home.